There is one piece that doesn't quite fit in the whole Prigozhin coup affair. By now, you will have read all kinds of analysts and countless videos on the subject, but there is still one question to be answered. What did Lukashenko promise Prigozhin? Put yourself in the shoes of Wagner's leader for just one moment. You're about to enter Moscow. Suddenly, Alexander Lukashenko calls and says, "Hey man, turn around, come with me to Belarus, and don't worry, no one is gonna kill you." Would you really trust him? I mean, if there is one thing that characterizes Vladimir Putin, it is that he does not hesitate attempting to kill his opponents. And that is not just a metaphorical term. I mean, remember Alexei Navalny, who was almost poisoned to death? And so many others who were not so lucky. And if there is one person that Putin would like to see in the ground right now, it is Prigozhin. So what makes this man think that he is safe in Belarus, that he is an ally of Russia? Well, here comes the hypothesis we're putting forward in this video. What if this is a masterstroke by Lukashenko? For the moment, we all agree that he's been one of the biggest beneficiaries of this coup attempt. But how much of a beneficiary? Let's put it more boldly. What if, in reality, Vladimir Putin has been the mug or the simp of this whole affair and he doesn't know it? Pay attention, because in today's video, we are going to touch on many clues that will make you see the Prigozhin coup with very different eyes. One of our favorite internet pastimes is following pro-Russian propagandists on Twitter. They still think that Putin is a strategic genius, a four-dimensional chess champion. And in order to justify that Putin is a strategic genius, they are capable of doing real somersaults of mental gymnastics. Pay attention to this meme that has been circulating lately. Sure, now it turns out that, in reality, Prigozhin was following Putin's dictates to end up 100 kilometers from Kyiv. A masterstroke, right? Oh. Let's see. If Putin really wanted to send Wagner's troops to the border with Kyiv, he wouldn't have needed to fake a coup and risk his internal position. Besides, what would be the point? I mean, forgive me for laughing, but what is the point of trying to take Kyiv again with 25,000 troops? If you remember, in February of 2022, with nearly 200,000 troops armed to the hilt, they made fools of themselves. Now with far fewer troops, are they gonna improve the result? I mean, that's quite the chess move. My dear Putin fanboys, I understand that faith moves mountains, but this is already a joke. No matter how you look at it, Prigozhin's coup has absolutely no good interpretations for Russia. None. We can argue about whether it has good or bad interpretations for Ukraine, but it is clear that Putin has been the biggest loser in all of this. But that's something that most of us already knew. The question now is, who is the biggest beneficiary? Well, in this case, there is little doubt. Alexander Lukashenko, the dictator of Belarus. For the moment, he has set himself up as the savior of Putin's Russia. But what if, in reality, he has been taking advantage of Putin's lack of control? To sum up this story in Twitter terms, or in Reddit terms, we used to think that Putin was a Chad. Now we are seeing that in reality, he is a textbook simp. And why do we say that Lukashenko has benefited so much from this coup d'etat? Why do we say that the disaster for Putin may be even greater than we thought and puts him in a position of a mug as regards Belarus? Today, we're going to answer all of these questions. But first, if you like what we do and you want to help us grow, you can join our Patreon community. In addition to contributing to this project, you will also receive a lot of extra content, such as the bulletin, the weekly snapshot, and exclusive merchandising. Thank you very much to those of you who are already helping us by being part of this growing community. I'll leave you the link to join in the description. And now, let's continue with, you guessed it, some history.
A very resilient dictator.
For those who do not know him, Alexander Lukashenko is the dictator who has ruled Belarus with an iron fist since 1994. One of the few dictators who does not even make an effort to put on a democratic mask. In fact, he has even bragged about his dictatorial status with phrases like this one.
It is better to be a dictator than gay. Alexander Lukashenko.
But when the Ukrainian war started, we all expected that the Belarusian economy would collapse. Think of it this way. Belarus has already been sanctioned by the West, but unlike Russia, they have no gas or oil. The main export of this country of 9 million people is fertilizers and some technology. For example, are you familiar with the video game World of Tanks? Well, it's made in Belarus, or at least it used to be.
Belarus's biggest games company is leaving the country, and Russia, World of Tanks developer Wargaming to close studios and transfer operation of games.
To give you an idea, since the 2020 protests, more than 200,000 IT workers have left Belarus. These figures are truly atrocious if we take into account that this particular industry has a total of between 60 to 100,000 workers. Belarus is losing more than 20% of its most qualified workers. At this point, we can say that the only economic sectors left alive in the country are fertilizers and some metallurgy. The problem is, how can they export these products? Belarus is landlocked, and even before the Ukrainian war started, Lithuania had already forbidden them to use the port of Klaipėda. It used to be the main outlet for Belarus's fertilizers. Without it, the entire economy was on the verge of collapse. In fact, in just 1 year, Belarus's exports to the European Union fell by 45%. Take a look at this graph. If you notice, after the announcement of the closure of the Lithuanian port to Belarus, the country's currency falls. Then comes the Ukrainian war and Western sanctions, and it plummets. And all of a sudden, in July 2020, it bounces back, almost miraculously. Yes, that's right, and since then it has continued to fall slowly. Of course, capital controls have played a key role, but these have not been the currency's only shield. To give you an idea, some predictions were that Belarus's GDP would fall by 10% in 2022. However, this drop came in at 4.7%. It's still a huge crisis, don't get me wrong, but it is not the hole that you would have expected. And why, you might ask? What has Belarus done to avoid Armageddon? Well, we can sum it up in one phrase: Russia to the rescue. That's right, Russia has done everything possible to help its ally. For example, they have ceded all their ports so that they can resume exports. Not only that, Minsk is going to build its own port on Russian territory. Thanks to this, they can continue to export their fertilizers to countries like China and Brazil. Russia has offered very generous lines of credit to the country, and as a good ally, it has even given it preference for imports. In other words, the Russians now import more Belarusian products than before. To be precise, 40% more than before the war. This has served to absorb the shock of the fall in exports to the European Union. Not surprisingly, all of this comes with oil and gas prices that are the envy of all of Europe. And believe me, this has been felt by all citizens. Just look at their gasoline prices. In other words, Belarus is having a hard time, but not as hard as you might expect. And it's all thanks to Russia. But wait a minute, because we're not just talking about the economy. Check this out.
A dictator with feet of clay.
Unlike Putin, Lukashenko does have a known and organized opposition. You see, in 2020, they held elections. An election as fraudulent as you would expect, but with a difference. In this case, there was a candidate in opposition to Lukashenko, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, and this woman did manage to galvanize an opposition movement that resulted in massed protests against the dictatorship. Of course, Lukashenko responded with the brutal repression one would expect. See for yourself in this graphic. Right now, however, Tikhanovskaya is in exile in Lithuania. From there, she is organizing a very well-assembled opposition movement. To give you an idea, they even have an app called New Belarus. From there, they coordinate with all Belarusians in exile. Meanwhile, Lukashenko does not have much power for preventing a serious uprising. For starters, the Belarusian army is in much the same condition as the Ukrainian army was before 2014. Soviet weaponry, lots and lots of corruption, and very few troops. To put a number on it, it's estimated that the Belarusian army consists of only about 50,000 soldiers. And that's not all. Of these troops, it is estimated that only 17,000 are currently trained and prepared for combat. And that is being generous. Many sources reduce that estimate even further to between 6,000 and 10,000 troops. And to top it all off, it is not even very clear that they are 100% loyal to Lukashenko. Indeed, one of the reasons why this country has not sent troops to Ukraine is because the dictator knows he cannot put too much pressure on his generals. Yes, it is true, Belarus has allowed Russian troops to pass through its national territory, but that's as far as their help goes. And at the same time, Belarusians were generating this kind of news.
Rebel forces in Belarus partially cut off railway route into Ukraine.
So you see, Lukashenko can't even prevent sabotage on his own territory. And the question is, how can you maintain a dictatorship with such feet of clay? And the answer is a single phrase: Russia to the rescue.
Vladimir Putin has offered to send military assistance to support Belarus President Alexander Lukashenko as up to 200,000 protesters gather to demand his removal.
This was Putin's help when Lukashenko was on the ropes in 2020, but look what they are doing now.
Belarus starts taking delivery of Russian nuclear weapons.
That's right, Belarus is already under the nuclear umbrella of Russia. By the time you watch this video, Belarus will already have nuclear weapons to defend its territory, and all of this arrives as a present from Vladimir Putin. The question is, does all this support come for free? Well, obviously not. So what is the price then? Well, we're going to look at that now.
We will be together someday.
In 1991, Belarus became independent from the Soviet Union, but Moscow never quite believed that this country would be free and sovereign for long. By 1999, with Boris Yeltsin as president, Belarus signed an agreement for the so-called Union State. This means that someday, Russia and Belarus would unite in a supranational entity called Union State. Named this way, it sounds like a kind of European Union, right? I doubt I need to convince you that it is not. The name suggests something like that, a union or a marriage, but think about this carefully. This is Russia, the largest country in the world in terms of territory, with more than 140 million inhabitants. And that's Belarus. Clearly, it was not a marriage between equals, but a contract of pure and simple submission. An attempt for Belarus to become just another Russian region. And there is one thing we have to be very clear about. Lukashenko may be an evil and ruthless tyrant, but he is not a fool, and he is not willing to lose his power. So these two countries signed the agreement, but since then, they have not taken any steps in the direction of uniting. And not only that, Putin has gone so far as to pressure Lukashenko using his biggest economic weapon, oil and gas. And the Belarusian dictator has even stood up to him by going to such lengths as this.
Belarus threatens to siphon off Russian oil intended for Europe.
That's right, this is not a joke. Belarus went so far as to threaten to steal Russian gas passing through its territory and being shipped to Europe. Even so, that happened back in 2020, specifically from before the protests against Lukashenko. At that time, this dictator thought he had a position of strength. But then came the mass protests, and in Minsk, they realized that a dictator only has power if he has military muscle to support him. Without that, there's nothing in it. So when Lukashenko found himself on the ropes, he had no choice but to go crawling back to who else? Putin. And that's basically been the state of the relationship between these two countries over the last 2 years, reaching extremes like this one.
Leaked document outlines Russia's 2030 Belarus annexation strategy.
Nevertheless, stay tuned, because now things have changed. Once again, Lukashenko may be bad, but he's not a fool, and he knows how to spot the opportunities in a situation. Here comes the plot twist that no one expected.
Who's the mug here?
On the 24th of June, 2023, the Wagner Group mercenaries are planted a few hundred kilometers from Moscow. Within hours, flights out of Moscow are sold out. Muscovites are terrified by what looks like to be the start of a civil war. We are talking about almost 25,000 rebel troops who are advancing through Russian territory and appearing quite at home. And you might be wondering, could they have taken Moscow? Well, probably not. But it is clear that had they continued their march, it would have been a real bloodbath. And then, just when Putin was really on the ropes, this happens. What you're going to hear now is literally the telephone conversation that Lukashenko himself claims that he had with Putin. Come on, Putin. How are you going to liquidate the mutineers? Let's talk to Prigozhin and his commanders. Look, Sasha. He won't even pick up the phone. He doesn't want to talk to me anymore. And then Lukashenko arrives and calls Prigozhin. Minutes later, Wagner says they are leaving Moscow and going to Belarus. And hours later, the Kremlin says this.
Russia drops criminal charges against Prigozhin after Wagner rebellion.
For the next few days, Prigozhin is unaccounted for. At the same time, Russia says that all Wagner's mercenaries who did not participate in the mutiny will be welcomed into the regular army. But remember that Prigozhin had between 20,000 and 25,000 military personnel in his command at the time of the coup. And you will say, can mercenaries be loyal? Well, probably much more than we might think. For one thing, they supported him in his coup attempt. But also, think about this. Prigozhin has recruited ex-officers from the Russian army and paid them astronomical salaries. He has also recruited ex-convicts. And you will say, can an ex-convict be loyal? And the answer is yes, very much so. We are talking about people whose lives have been totally destroyed. People with no family and no future to whom Prigozhin offered a second chance. The chance to go from being criminals to being heroes of their homeland. Throughout history, we have seen lots of elite groups that have been created with very similar philosophies. In other words, Prigozhin is not alone, and Lukashenko knows this. And that's why Lukashenko is not only welcoming the leader of the Wagners into his country, but his entire entourage as well.
They will tell us about the weapons, which worked well, which didn't, and tactics, and weapons, and how to attack, how to defend. That's invaluable. That's what we need to take from the Wagnerites, Alexander Lukashenko.
And the truth is that he is right. Wagner's mercenaries are real beasts, responsible for the most savage tortures you can imagine. But one thing is certain. They are practically the only ones who've achieved any victory for the Russian side in Ukraine. And that explains news items like this one.
Belarus building camps for relocated Wagner members.
You see, Lukashenko is not wasting any time. And some will say, but where are they going to get the money to maintain these warriors? After all, without the contracts Wagner had with the Kremlin, who's going to pay their salaries? Well, if you're a long-time follower of all of us here at VisualPolitik, you already know that Wagner is not only active in Ukraine, it's also active in Africa, where they do not charge in money, but are paid in kind. Wagner controls several mines in Africa. We are talking about gold and other resources worth billions of dollars. All that money is no longer going to the Kremlin, but into Wagner's pockets. In other words, it is very likely that Prigozhin's accounts are as healthy as those of Putin himself. And where is Prigozhin now? Exactly, in Minsk, the capital of Belarus. And what did Lukashenko need to stand face to face with Putin? Exactly, military muscle. Earlier, we said that Belarus only has an army of less than 50,000 active units and that they are all poorly trained and poorly armed. Now, they have just received 20 to 25,000 combat experienced and well-trained troops. And I know what some of you will say here. Right, okay, but Grant, what's it to say that Prigozhin will be loyal to Lukashenko? And the answer is circumstances. Wagner cannot go back to Russia, but they need to be somewhere. Few countries are going to offer them asylum except Belarus. In other words, for the time being, Lukashenko and Prigozhin have very good reasons to be best friends. And of course, by the time Putin has realized this move, it's already too late. After everything that we have seen, one thing is crystal clear. Putin has just become Lukashenko's mug. First, he gave him money and political support. Then, he sent him nuclear weapons. And now, he's given him a private army. The question is, are we going to see the tension between Russia and Belarus flare up again? Will Putin try to remove the nuclear weapons he already has installed in Belarus? Who has more power right now, Putin or Lukashenko? You can leave me your answers in the comments below. And as always, don't forget that here on VisualPolitik, we release new videos every week. So subscribe to this channel and hit the little bell button down there so you don't miss any of our updates. If you like this video, like it so we know. All the best. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.